Sorry?
Never mind. Let me turn off the mic.
Oh, got it. Thanks. Given that we have a minion, I just want to say Shabbat Shalom and welcome everybody. We're on a bit of a tight schedule because of Slichot tonight. It'll be a quick turnaround. So I'm going to try to keep us to our time posts as much as possible. So with that, I think we're just going to go ahead and jump right in. If you have the Lev Shalem book, we're on page 214. It's great to see you all. Glad that we're all here together. Ashrei Yoshvei Veitecha Od Yelalu Chasela Ashrei Am Shekacha Lo Ashrei Am Shadonai Elohav Tehila LeDavid Aromim Elohai HaMelech Varvacha Shimcha Leolam Vaed B'chol Yom Arvacheka V'ala Shimcha Leolam Vaed Gadol Adonai Mulal Me'od V'ligdulato Ein Cheker Dor L'dor Shabach Masecha Uvoratecha Yagidu Hadar kavod hodecha, v'divrei nivotecha asicha, ve'ezuz norotecha yomeru, udalatcha saprena, zecharav tucha yabiu, v'tzitchatcha yeranenu, chanun rachum Adonai, erech apayim mugdol chesed, Tov Adonai lakol, v'rachamav al kol ma'asav, yoducha Adonai kol ma'asecha, v'chasidecha yevarchucha, Kavod malchutcha yomeru, v'radcha yadaberu, lehodia livnei adam gvurotav, u'chvod adar malchuto. Malchutcha malchut kol olamim, u'memshaltecha b'chol dor v'ador, somecha l'chol noflim, v'zokef l'chol akfufim. Einecho lecha yasaberu, v'ata noten lahem otochlam b'ito, poteach et yadecha, u'masbia l'chol chai ratzon. Tzadik Adonai b'chol dorachav, v'chasid b'chol ma'asav. Karov Adonai l'chol korav, l'chol asher yikra'u v'emet. Ratzon yarav yaseh, v'et shavatam yishma v'yoshiyehim. Shomer Adonai kol alvav, v'et kol arshaim yashmid. Tilat Adonai yadaber pi, v'varech kol basar shem kodsho l'olam va'ed. V'anachnu nevarech yah, me'ata v'ad olam. Hallelujah. 2:16. Uval Etzion Goel, Shavei Fesha, Be'akov Neum Adonai. Ve'ata kadosh, Yoshev Tilot Yisrael, Ve'karazel Zeh Ve'amar. Kadosh, 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 Adonai Tzvaot, Meloch Ha'aretz Kevodo. V'tisaeni ruach v'shma acharai kol rash gadol, Baruch kavod Adonai mihimkomo. Adonai yimloch leolam va'ed. V'yivtechu v'cha yodei shemecha, ki lo azavta dorshecha Adonai, Adonai chafetz l'man tzidko, yagdil Torah ve'yadir. So as you know, we're omitting Kaddishes that aren't the mourner's Kaddish. So with that, we're going to go straight to the Torah service. And again, because we're not in person as a minyan, we are not going to do the formal processional of the Torah, but we'll get straight into the Torah reading, which is from Ha'azinu, It is Devarim, starting verse 32:1. Just a little bit of brief context. At this point in Devarim, God is giving Moshe the shirah, the poem, the song to write down and to commit to the hearts and ears of the people, something that will always bring them back to the laws and values of God and our people. Hazinu hashamayim v'adabera v'tishma haaretz imrei fihi. Ya'arov kamatar lichihi tizal katal imrati ki se'irim ale deshe v'chrivivim ale esev ki shemaranai ekra havu godel Eloheinu. Hatzur tamihim polo kichol drachav mishpat el emunah ve'ein avel tzadik v'yashar hu shichet lo banav mumam dori kesh uftalto hal Adonai tigmalu zot am naval v'lo chacham Halohu avicha kanecha hu ascha vaychonenecha. Zechor yemot olam bino shnot dor vador shal avicha vayagdecha zkenecha v'yomru lach Be'anchel elyon goyim ve'hafrido b'nei adam yatzev gvulot amim lemispar b'nei Israel ki chelek Adonai amo Yaakov chevel nachalato imtza ehu be'eretz midbar Uvtohu Yelel Yeshimon Yesovavenhu Yevohonanehu Yitzreinhu Keishoneno Kenesher Yair Kino Al Gozalav Yerachef Yifrosh Kanafav Yikachehu Yisa Ehu al Evrataho Adonai Badar Yanchenu Ve'eni Mo El Nechar. And I apologize. I realize I didn't say Lasok B'divrei beforehand. So I apologize for that. I hope people may have said it in their heads or to themselves. I said it in my head, but I apologize for not saying it before and out loud. So that is our Torah reading. We now resume in our service with the silent Amidah, which is on page 223. Once again, even though I wish we could say this together in person, I'll just pause now for us to have our own silent Amidah to ourselves. Ose shalom bimromav hu yaseh shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael ve'imeru amen. Ose shalom bimromav hu yaseh shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael ve'imeru amen. We're on page 230. Tidkatcha tzedek leolam, v'tortcha emet, v'tidkatcha Elohim ad marom, asher asita gdolot, Elohim yichamocha, tidkatcha keharel, mishpatecha tehom rabah, adam uvhema, toshia Adonai. So again, we skip the Kaddish and we go straight to the Aleinu, which is on page 231. Aleinu l'shabeach ladon hakol, latet gedula leotzer breshit, shelo asanu kegoye haratzot, velo samanu kemishpachot hadama, shelo sam chelkenu kahem v'gor aleinu kechol hamonam, v'anachnu korim umishtachavim umodim, lifnei melech malchei hamlachim hakadosh baruch hu. Shehuno teshamayim ve'yoser haaretz, u'moshav yikaro b'shamayim ima'al, u'shchinatu zo begovei meromim. Hu Eloheinu einod, emet malkeinu efesulato, kakatuv b'torato, v'yadata yom v'hashevota, el levavecha, ki Adonai hu Elohim, b'shamayim ima'al, Ve'al haaretz mitachad einod. Kakatu b'toratecha, Adonai yimloch le'olam va'ed, v'nemar v'haya Adonai, lemelech al kol haaretz, bayom hahu, yeh Adonai echad, u'shemo echad. We now turn to the Kaddish Yatom, Mourner's Kaddish, on page 232. I'm not entirely sure of the protocol, but I do want to invite anybody who is mourning to unmute themselves, even if it sounds messy, so that we can recite it together. Yitkadal v'yitkadash shemei rabbah, be'alma divra yirteh malchuteh, v'chayechon uvyomechon uvchaye techol beit Israel, ba'adma ubizman kariv v'imru amen. Yehi shmei rabbah mevorach le'olam u'almei almaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh v'yitadar v'yitaleh v'yitalal shmei kudasha brichu le'ela min kol yerchata v'shirata tush bechata v'nechemata da'amiran be'alma v'imru amen. Yehi shlama rabba min shemaya v'chaim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Oseh shalom bimromav hu ya'aseh shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Kenji, can I get a quick time check?
Sure, we are at 7:07.
Okay, great. So Shabbat Shalom, everybody. It's so great to see your faces. For the teaching today, I have a couple of sources that I was debating whether I wanted to deliver in a more frontal fashion, given our medium, or put the sources up before Shabbat so you could print them out and we can study them together. I hope it's okay that for this one, I opted for a bit of a more frontal one, at least at the start. But I'm hoping that afterwards we'll have plenty of time to discuss at least the way that I weave and understand the texts together. So I hope that's okay, and afterwards we can discuss it. Since there is midrash on Torah from here, and because I neglected to say la'asok b'divrei Torah before the Torah service, I hope it's okay that it'll suffice. I say it now to give kavod haTorah for the Torah that we'll be touching on in the learning. So with that, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam la'asok b'divrei Torah. A while ago, I gave a teaching for Seudah Shlishit where I quoted from East of Eden by John Steinbeck. And I feel like I do that a lot. I feel like I overly rely on East of Eden, which I feel it bothers me, and I think it's not fair because I should really read more books and I should bring other books to our attention for the sake of keeping it new and exciting. So I've read a bunch of books this year, and I found something that I think you're really going to like. It's from East of Eden by John Steinbeck. He writes, "I believe that there is one story in the world, and only one. Humans are caught in their lives, in their thoughts, in their hungers and ambitions, in their avarice and cruelty, and in their kindness and generosity too, in a net of good and evil. There is no other story." My first thought about that is that can't be right. Every story? What about ours? For Seudah Shlishit, we look ahead to the next Torah reading for next week, and we're coming up on Rosh Hashanah. So I want to talk about the Akedah, the binding of Isaac. And I'm wondering if that fits into Steinbeck's categorization here. Is this also, at its core, about good and evil? While there's a rich tradition of wrestling with the Akedah, why God tests Abraham this way, how Abraham could have come so close to sacrificing his son, I've always understood the Akedah to be a love story between God and Abraham. During that Seudah Shlishit teaching, I brought Soren Kierkegaard's interpretation that Abraham's great faith isn't his willingness to sacrifice Isaac. It's his firm belief that God would never actually have him go through with it, that the judge of the earth would indeed do justly. And so ultimately, maybe the Akedah is an indictment of a prevailing practice of the time, child sacrifice, and the first step towards the kind of worship God wants, prayer. But however you read it, it just doesn't seem to me to be about good versus evil. It seems to be about love. But in the interest of bringing at least different Jewish books to our attention, I wanted to bring the Midrash, a creative body of rabbinic literature which explores this same story in the following way. In the Akedah, we read that Abraham rose early in the morning and saddled his donkey. In other words, Abraham loved to obey God's will, hurried to do it, even waking up early to carry out the task. The Midrash asks why. Abraham was wealthy and had servants who could have loaded the donkey for him. He had Eliezer, whom he entrusts with sacred responsibilities. Why wake up early and do it himself? It then brings another biblical story, that of Bilam. Bilam is a foreign prophet hired to curse the children of Israel. We read, "And Bilam rose up in the morning and saddled his donkey." The Midrash asks the same question. Why? Surely he had servants who could have loaded the donkey for him. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai answers, "Ahava mekalkelet et hashura, v'sina mekalkelet et hashura." Love disrupts the natural order, and hate disrupts the natural order. Even if it may have been the norm at that time for servants to load the donkeys, Abraham's love for his creator and Bilam's love of money, of self-advancement, allowing him to respond to the king who wanted him to carry out a task of hate. It disrupts, in both cases, it disrupts the perceived natural order. And I think that rings true today. We've been quarantined now for 6 months. It's affected all of us differently, but for the most part, it's been a struggle. Like Abraham, we've been tested and tasked with making sacrifices. As a result, family dynamics have been strained. Even relationships have dissolved. We need to create space and be there for each other to process all of that. But it's also important to note that at the same time, some families and relationships are emerging from this experience stronger than ever. It seems like every time I check Instagram, another friend just got engaged or had a Zoom wedding because they just couldn't wait until this is over to share their lives together. How is that possible? How are any of us actually getting closer in an era of social distance? Maybe it's because love disrupts the natural order. A natural order which, according to The Shining, should have all of us sticking our heads in doorways screaming, "Here's Johnny." But for the most part, we're not. And miraculously, many of us are finding that 6 months of each other isn't enough. We want more. And yet what we're living through has further exposed how wide certain gaps in society are. The fight for equal rights and treatment of Black lives continues to bring systemic racism to light. The cruelty we have witnessed is heartbreaking, enraging, and baffling to anyone who believes in a natural order of B'Tselem Elohim, that we are all created in the image of God and deserving of dignity and respect. What could possibly be strong enough to question that? Hate, it seems, disrupts the natural order too. As the Midrash continues, we begin to see how the Akedah might actually resonate with Steinbeck's thinking, that there's only ever been good versus evil, because it continues to put biblical stories in conversation with each other. Joseph, following years of estrangement from his father, and after his brother sold him to Egypt as a slave, it says, quote, made ready his chariot to meet Israel, his father. But then Pharaoh, years later, quote, made ready his chariot to pursue after the children of Israel to reinstate slavery. Joseph, a slave in Egypt, defied the natural order through God's love and rises up the ranks until he is able to prepare a royal chariot to greet his father in love. Pharaoh prepares his chariot with a heart hardened by hate to reinstitute an unnatural institution. And all of a sudden, it is about good versus evil, because it's about love versus hate. Two themes at the core of our human story and Jewish story. The Midrash concludes, let saddling counteract saddling. Let preparing counteract preparing. Let the saddling of the donkey, the preparing of the chariot, let one counteract each other in each time. Essentially, it's our sacred mission as a Jewish people to respond to evil and hate in the world with acts of good and love, to counteract. And through our behavior, we can only hope to merit God's attention. Like Abraham, who cleaved the wood of the sacrifice in love, so the Midrash teaches God cleaved the Red Sea in two and brought us to safety. It's easy to feel like we're drowning in a sea of hate right now. And in our darker moments, feel convinced that this is how our story ends. But love defies the natural order. We can respond to social distance by growing closer. We can cleave to one another as the waters part and we march on toward liberation. So that concludes my frontal presentation of it. I want a quick time check and open it up for discussion. Where are we on time?
We're at 7:15, roughly.
Okay, great. Yeah, so we're good. We have time. So go ahead. Feel free to unmute yourself and we can discuss. And I'm happy to give more prompts for thinking. Mostly, I'm wondering if you buy my reading of the two texts. This is the Midrash, which reads these different moments as sort of examples of love disrupting the natural order, examples of hate disrupting the natural order, how both have the power to do that. And whether this falls under Steinbeck's sort of thesis that the only story ever is good versus evil. I wonder if you agree, disagree. And also, I think love and hate, good and evil is more complicated than just two separate things, right? I mean, often they counteract, not just counteract, they cooperate. They're part of the same, they're roots of the same tree. So, if good and evil were separate, it would be two stories. But if Steinbeck's saying it's one story, maybe it's because good and evil really are related and work together in a lot of ways. And it's too basic just to say, okay, we have to respond to hate with love. I mean, often you can love somebody one day and feel hate the next, and it just isn't so cut and dry. And ultimately, I think it's about leaning towards towards good and towards love, but understanding how the Yetzer Tov and Hara operate together. Anyway, all food for thought. I'd love to hear some of your thoughts and reactions and responses.
Josh, this is Brant. I always say, I mean, I'm fond of saying that love and hate are opposite sides of the same coin.
Yeah.
And what I mean by that is that in order to really hate something, you have to at some point really appreciate it or love it. They're not distinct, really, just like you said. And I often draw on the nature of marital discord, where people develop severe hatred of their spouse, only as a result of that extreme closeness. And so there's something about the two that are intertwined, and that's why we can never get rid of them. They go hand in hand.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. I think that's beautifully said. Yeah, I've always thought that in terms of Yetzer Tov and Yetzer Hara, that life can't just be about trying to blot out our Yetzer Hara, because why would God have given us both? I mean, there's got to be use to it, value to it. So I think it's the more difficult task, the more sophisticated way of looking at it must be that we have to channel it for good. We have to use it in a way. Joey, I think I see your hand. Please.
Great. Yes. So I also have heard that the opposite of love is indifference.
Right.
Because it's been because I've also heard that that hate, when you hate something or someone, you still care about it or them, whereas if you're indifferent, you don't care about the person that you don't love or strongly dislike, would probably be a better way to say it than hate, depending on the situation, I guess.
Yeah, thank you. I think that really corresponds with what Brant just said about you have to, in order to hate something, you have to have also loved it at one point. That idea that it's the opposite of love isn't hate, it's indifference. There's that quote, right, that the world doesn't end with a bang, but with a whimper, that the end of humanity isn't some big display of hate. It's indifference. It's our failure to be triggered by what's going on and called to action. It's letting things sort of be destroyed. At least that's how I read that quote. But yeah, that's what made me think of that as well. More thoughts, more reactions to the Midrash, to Steinbeck? How are people feeling in their own lives? Do you feel like the quarantine experience is allowing you to come closer to your core people? Is it more, like exacerbating those relationships, straining? And you don't have to be too personal, but I'm just wondering in general, do you feel like you're still able to find connection and deepen relationships, or is it just so isolating and difficult? And ultimately, I think it's both, like we've been talking about. I think it oscillates, but would be interested to hear. Yeah, Joey.
Well, it's not as much of a problem for me being isolated because I have an essential job.
Oh, that's good. Yeah, it definitely helps, right? I know a lot of us are struggling with work and not being able to work, or furlough or laying off. So very lucky and blessed to be able to have a working job. And I feel that way too with Betham, being able to continue on as an intern in this capacity. I'm really grateful to everybody for that. Any more thoughts and reflections?
Hi, this is Marlies.
Hi, Marlies.
I guess I would say it's, since I live with other people and I feel close to the people I live with, and then it's been sort of hard having, being careful in this time of distancing and not being able to get as close to other people that I really care about.
Yeah. I think that's what resonated to me about the Akedah and sacrifice, right? That it's, you have your core people, the people you're living with at home, and it maybe feels like you've had to sacrifice these other relationships with people who aren't in your immediate circle, and how difficult a sacrifice that is. And there's no immediate silver lining to that, just sort of recognizing how difficult that is, and maybe understanding it within this context of love disrupting the natural order, hoping that ultimately those relationships will be able to weather this storm based on the strength of that love. But that doesn't make the immediate any easier. Yeah.
You know what's always troubled me about the Akedah is that because Abraham did this thing, God says to Abraham, "I'm going to make you as plentiful as the stars in the sky and the sand of the seas, or the sand on the sea."
Yeah.
And you know, we as a Jewish people throughout all of history seem to be a minority. So I always wonder what that prophecy means. You know, about being as, you know, numerous as, and all I can figure is that that statement maybe applies to all the children of Abraham and not just the Jews, because in that sense they are plentiful. But that's not a very Jewish answer. But that's my issue with the Akedah. I never know what that actually means. That numerous statement. I don't know how that you interpret that. That's been my question.
I think that's really interesting, and I'd love to give it a crack and also open it up to the room. First, Kenji, 7:30 is sort of our marker for transitioning to Mariv. Can I have a time check?
7:23.
7:23.
Yeah.
Yes.
Perfect. Will you give me like a 1 minute warning to 7:30?
Absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. So, I mean, the way that I initially react to that is there are times in the Torah where there are numbers that are used that aren't meant to be literal. Maybe like sevenfold, right? Like Cain's punishment of sevenfold. There are certain numbers, at least with Tzioni Zevet, my teacher at Ziegler, he understands these to be sort of, it doesn't literally always mean sevenfold. It's just a number to express a long time, sort of like a phrase being used. That's not a satisfactory answer to me, because it's like, so, but basically that's saying, it's maybe understanding it more as a phrase and figure of speech that you will be very numerous, and not a literal, you will be as numerous as the sand and the stars. And in which case that prophecy certainly was fulfilled, given that we are very numerous. But you're right. And I actually have thought similar to you, right? If you count for the children of Abraham, then we really are majority in that way. Just something happened along the line to split us apart, but but otherwise we really would. I don't know, do other people react to that, have any different answers? Yeah, but it's interesting. I mean, yeah, I for me, I'm satisfied to feel like that prophecy is fulfilled, given being very numerous. But you're right. It doesn't seem like we're stars and sand necessarily.
Except in New York and Israel and Los Angeles. Other than that, no.
Right, exactly. And I think there are beautiful things about just the poetry of stars and sand too, you know, to focus not on the number aspect, but you know, the uniqueness of stars and their ability to be a light unto the nations, right? It's sort of, there are other ways in which hopefully that promise is fulfilled in meaningful ways. What do you think about, I mean, do you think every story can be boiled down to good and evil? I like how the Midrash did that. I like that at how it put, you know, Midrash often puts different psukim in context with one another. And in that way, that's how it interprets. And I thought it was really clever the way it, you know, it highlighted, oh, Joseph made ready his chariot, so did Pharaoh. And you can see how that's good versus evil playing out in our history, and how hopefully Jews can be, you know, on the side of good always. Although, you know, whether or not that's true in actuality, we hope for, and hopefully we can counteract and correct the ways in which we're deficient. But I bought the Midrash. I liked what it was doing. Do people think that it's just sort of coincidental? They're just pulling phrases that connect. Were people moved by that, or kind of underwhelmed?
Well, I think that it makes sense to view the world that way in terms of how the Midrash says, in terms of good and evil. I don't think the world is that way. I think that based on my years of experience, the world is rather gray.
Yeah.
But what I mean by that is there are good people who sometimes do mean bad things, and there are bad people that sometimes do really good things, and that no particular person is good or evil. And it's that constant struggle that we try to do more good and evil. And we always have the opportunity to shuva and to improve.
Right.
But I actually think the world's kind of gray. And that what that's really representing is the struggle in each of us to be more good than we are evil. And that it's somewhat presumptuous to think that we could always be good and we should always try not to be evil. But the reality is we all come down somewhere in the gray.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think it's too basic to say it's anybody is just, and I think Steinbeck actually does a great job of that in East of Eden and other stories of just highlighting the complexity of every human. His characters are always very multi-layered and faceted, and you have moments of real evil, but then also redemption always. And it's easy to lose sight of that. Often, I think we label things one or the other. But you're right. How important it is to recognize that we're both, and that it's never so simple. It's gray. Yeah. Yeah. What about just in the remaining couple minutes? Any final closing reflections, reactions, any thoughts that this sparks leading up to Rosh Hashanah?
We've got a 1 minute warning.
Thank you, Kenji. All right. Well, we don't have to end exactly at 7:30. We'll go ahead and start transitioning to Marif. Just want to thank everybody for the learning, for participating, for your insights. And I hope it was a helpful study. And feel free, if you'd like the source of the Midrash, happy to connect with you after Shabbat. But it's Bereshit Rabbah 55:8. All right. With that, we will turn to Mariv, and then we'll transition into Havdalah. We're on page 264 in Lev Shalem. V'hurachum yechaper avon v'lo yashchit, v'hir bala ashiva po v'lo ya'ir kol chamato, Adonai Hoshia hamelech yaneinu v'yom koreinu. We skip the Baruch Hu and continue. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher bidvaro mariv aravim, b'chochma poteach she'arim, u'bitvuna meshna itim. Uma'avir yom u'mevi laila, uma'avdil ben yom u'vein laila, Adonai Savot shemoho, El chai v'kayam, tamid yimloch aleinu le'olam va'ed, Baruch atah Adonai, hama'ariv aravim, Ahavat olam beit Yisrael amcha haftat. V'avtacha al tasir mimenu le'olamim, Baruch atah Adonai, ohev amo Yisrael, El melech ne'eman. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Adonai Elohechem emed. Umalchuto beratzon kiblu alehem Moshe uMiriam u'bnei Yisrael alachanu shira b'simcha rabba v'emru chulam mi chamocha ba'alim Adonai mi kamocha ne'dar b'kodesh norati lot o sefele Malchutcha ra'u v'necha b'kayim livnei Moshe ze Elianu ve'amruhu Adonai yimloch le'olam va'ed v'ne'emar kifada Adonai et Yaakov Ugelo miyad chazak mimenu baruch ata Adonai Gal Yisrael. Hashkivenu Adonai Eloheinu leshalom. Ushmar tzeitenu v'ayinu l'chaim leshalom me'ata ve'ad olam baruch ata Adonai shomer amo Yisrael ad. Page 268. Baruch Adonai olam amen ve'amen. 269. Ki hamalchut shelcha hi ulo me'at timloch bechavod ki ein lanu melech ela ata baruch ata Adonai hamelech bichvodo tamid yimloch aleinu le'olam va'ed ve'al kol ma'asav. We turn now for silent Amidah on 270. Ose shalom bimromav, hu yaseh shalom aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael, ve'imru, imru, amen. Ose shalom bimromav, hu yaseh shalom aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael, ve'imru, imru, amen. We turn to page 279. We skip the Kaddish. V'hinu amar Adonai Eloheinu aleinu u'ma'aseh yadenu konaneh aleinu u'ma'aseh yadenu konanehu. Yoshev b'seter elyon b'tzel Shaddai yitlonan.
Just a heads up, we are at 7:40.
Thank you, thank you. Yikra'eni ve'enehu imo anochi v'tzara achaltzehu ve'achabdehu orech yamim asbiehu ve'arehu bishuati orech yamim asbiehu ve'arehu bishuati. We turn to 2:16. Ve'ata kadosh yoshev tehilot Yisrael v'karzel ze ve'amahar kadosh 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 Adonai tzvaot meloch la'aretz kevodo. V'tisa'eni ruach ve'eshma acharai kol ra'ash gadol baruch kavod Adonai mimkomo. Adonai yimloch le'olam va'ed. V'yivtechu v'chayodei shemecha ki lo azavta dorshecha Adonai Adonai chafetz lema'an tzidko yagdil Torah ve'yadir. We turn back to page 281 for the Aleinu. Aleinu l'shabech ladon hakol. Kenek v'lach Adonai Eloheinu. Kakatu v'toratecha Adonai yimloch le'olam va'ed. V'ne'emar v'haya Adonai lemelech al kol ha'aretz. Bayom hahu yeh Adonai echad u'shemo echad. We turn to the Kaddish Yatom. Let's have one person be the Amen person.
Top 27.
Oh, Psalm 27 for the season of repentance. Because of, we have a quick turnaround, and I want to make sure we do have Dala and not totally rush through it. So I will invite everyone to say that on your own after the service. I apologize for not being able to fit it in right now. But we'll do Kaddish Yatom, and I'll have one person please be the Amen person. Is there somebody reciting Mortis Kaddish who could unmute for the Amens? Anyone? Yeah? Okay, that would be great. We'll say it together, 282. Yitkadal v'yitkadash shemei rabbah. Ve'alma divra kirute ve'amlich malchute. V'chayechon v'yomechon v'chaye dechol beit Yisrael. Ba'agala v'zman kari v'imru. Amen. Yehe shmei rabba mevorach le'alam u'lalmei almaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitramam v'yitnaseh. V'yitadar v'yitaleh v'yitalal shmei dekudesha brichu. Ela min kol berchata v'shirata tush bechata v'nechamata da'amiran be'alma v'imru. Amen.
Amen.
Yehe shlam ba'rabba min shemaya v'chaim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru. Amen. Oseh shalom b'imromav. Hu ya'aseh shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru. Amen. We turn now for a quick but meaningful Havdalah on page 283. There's one there. We're, oh, yes, there is. Great. Just grabbing matches. Yeah. All right. Come on. Wow. Almost there. Sorry for the delay. Okay. Ya na 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 ya na 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 ya na ya na 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 ya na 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 ya na 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 ya na 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 ya na 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 ya na 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 הנה על ישועתי, אפתח ולא אפחד, כי עוזי וזמרת יה, אדוני ויהי לי לישועה, הוספתם מים בששון ממעייני הישועה, לאדוני הישועה, על עמך ברכתך סלע, אדוני צבאות עמנו. משכב לנו אלוהי יעקב סלע, אדוני צבאות, אשרי אדם בוטח בך, אדוני יאיר הושיע, המלך יעננו ויום קורנו, ליהודים הייתה אורה. ושמחה וששון ויקר כן תהיה לנו, יענני כוס ישועות אשא, ובשם אדוני אקרא. ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם בורא פרי הגפן. ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם בורא מאורי האש. ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם המבדיל בין כל קודש לחול, בין אור לחושך, בין ישראל לעמים, בין יום השביעי לששת ימי המעשה. ברוך אתה אדוני המבדיל בין קודש לחול.
Shavua Tov and Yasher Koach.
Thank you. Shavua Tov, everybody. We're going to go ahead and transition to Slichot now. Shavua Tov. Thank you all for being here. Good week. Shavua Tov.
Shavua Tov. Thank you.
All right, Kenji, we're going to go ahead and...
Hang on. Kenji, we're going to switch over. We're going to switch over to the S. Goldman account now, okay?
Got it. So I'll stop the live stream on this, log out of this account completely, or am I just starting that new service on this account?
Correct. It's not on this account. It's on the S. Goldman account for the Zoom out of Shabbat.
Copy
Okay.
that.
And we'll see all of you over there at Zoom out of Shabbat for Slichot in just a minute.